And the Treasurer, Joe Hockey, is expected to announce a budget deficit of close to $50 billion in his update today.
To discuss what else may be in the Treasurer's mid-year outlook, we're joined by HSBC Chief Economist Paul Bloxham in Sydney. Paul, good morning.
Good morning.
And in Hobart, Saul Eslake, Chief Economist at Bank of America Merrill Lynch. Nice to talk to you, Saul, as well. Good morning.
Thanks, Virginia.
So, look, I'll start with you. What are you expecting and what do you need to hear?
Well, I suspect on the basis of press reports that the deficit for 2013-14, the current financial year, will be revised up from $30 billion that was predicted by the pre-election economic and fiscal outlook in August to somewhere between $45 and $50 billion, of which I'd note in passing more than half the increase will be due to decisions that the coalition has taken since coming to office. The deficits for subsequent years will be revised upwards as well. That may be due to downgrades to the economic outlook, to weaker economic growth than previously forecast, particularly for 2014-15, and possibly to some further downward revision to forecasts for commodity prices and the terms of trade, which will give us yet another rerun of downgrades to estimates to revenues. The previously forecast return to surplus for 2016-17 will obviously disappear, and it's my understanding that as a result of the deal which the government reached with the Greens a couple of weeks ago to abolish the debt ceiling altogether in exchange for the provision of a lot more information in documents like this, the government will present a 10-year view of what the budget would look like in the absence of any corrective action. What we won't get today is any detail as to what sort of corrective action the government might be contemplating. We're going to have to wait until after the government's had a chance to consider the recommendations of its audit commission and look to next May's budget for detail as to what medicine will be administered to present ultimately a better picture of the budget than the Treasurer is going to unveil today.
Paul Bloxham, is that your sense as well? And would you rather today actually hear some detail?
Well, that's certainly what the media seems to be suggesting, what seems to be out there, that there's going to be a budget deficit of somewhere between 45 and 50 billion, and the sum of the deficits over the horizon are going to be more like 120 billion or about thereabouts, compared with the sum of the previous set of numbers that we saw just before the election of about 50 billion. So there is a significant blowout in the budget deficit. As Saul correctly noted, a part of that reflects more spending decisions by the coalition since the election, and holding on to those deficits over the horizon. I think in broad terms the numbers will probably look a bit more realistic in the scheme of things. We've had a run of budgets where it's looked as though we were going to get back to surplus reasonably unrealistically given the outlook for the economy, and I think it's absolutely the case that we're not going to see we're not likely to see any big announcements in terms of how they plan to get back to eventual surplus or big spending changes. That really won't come until the next May budget, which is somewhat disappointing because we are really going to be 9 months into the term of this government before we see plans for getting the budget back to, or solid plans for getting the budget back to surplus over some time horizon, or any big changes in terms of the fiscal outlook. And that's the real challenge. Australia faces a fiscal challenge, and we're not likely to see today any particular plans for getting ourselves in better shape over the horizon.
And you think it would be more responsible for us to hear from the government sooner than that?
Look, I think we're waiting for, obviously, the government's Commission of Audit, which is probably not going to announce any of their results until early next year, in time for the May budget. I just think it's quite a challenge to be waiting a whole 9 months before we see some more plans as to what's going to happen to the budget in the medium term. So yes, it does seem like we're going to be waiting quite a while before we see any particular fiscal changes or any medium-term plans. And Australia really does need some medium-term plans for getting the budget into better shape.
Saul Eslake, business figures quoted in the Financial Review today, including Rod Eddington and former Telstra Chairman Donald McGauchie, say that it's an utter disgrace so much money has been wasted, and that it was imperative to get back to balanced budgets as soon as possible. What's your view?
Well, I'm not sure I would use quite so strong a language, and it's certainly the case that Australia is running worse budget results than we should, considering that we haven't been in recession like many other industrialised economies, and we're just coming off what's been the biggest uplift in our terms of trade in commodity prices since the Victorian gold rushes of the 1850s. And so from that point of view, we should be doing better. On the other hand, our position isn't so bad. I mean, even $50 billion, big as a number though it sounds, would be 3% of GDP. That's a lot less than the figures of closer to 10% of GDP that, for example, Britain and the United States were confronting at the height of the financial crisis. And bearing in mind that the economy is growing at a below-trend pace now of about 2.5%, and we'll get further confirmation of that in the economic numbers underlying today's statement. And the unemployment rate has been drifting up and would be even higher than it is if it hadn't been for people dropping out of the workforce. This is probably not a time to be engaging in swinging tax increases or spending reductions. I think the more important thing for the government to be doing, and I think I share Paul's view on this, is to be drawing up drawing up strategies to put the budget back into surplus over a reasonable period, say 5 years, and to ensure that it stays there. And that doesn't necessarily require decisions to be announced now. What I would hope is that the Audit Commission will come up with strategies to improve the balance, the long-term balance between revenues and expenditures, and perhaps to put in place fiscal rules that ensure the mistakes that have been made over the last 3 or 5 years aren't repeated in future years.
But also, gentlemen, surely what's needed, apart from simply cuts in order to get the budget back into balance, would be a plan for growth and also a plan to increase productivity. Paul Bloxham, is that something that should be top of mind as well?
Well, it should certainly be part of the story, absolutely, that the government's spending and taxation decisions and any changes that they announce to that medium-term story should be things that mean that the government that it's supportive of productivity growth. That is, we need some tax reform in Australia at this stage. The tax system, I think, has been a drag on productivity. We need some regulatory reform. I think that's also been standing in the way of continued productivity growth. And we need to find a way also that Australia over the medium term can build some more infrastructure, because infrastructure does seem to be one thing that we are lacking and one of the things that has been constraining productivity growth. These are issues that hopefully will all be part of the Commission of Audit and the results that we see early next year. Today, we're unlikely to see very much of that at all, if anything. As I say, I think that's likely to be a topic for next year and for the budget next year.
And just, Saul, Eslake, just finally, are we looking at, in some way, at the new normal when it comes to talking about below trend growth and these kind of deficits without the big changes that both you speak of this morning?
Well, they will be the new normal in the absence of corrective action. And below trend growth means almost by definition rising unemployment. And if we are able to achieve faster growth over the medium to longer term, then not only will employment prospects be better, but the budget will be in better shape. I don't believe, however, that the condition of the budget can be cured by faster growth or better productivity alone, desirable though both of those are. I think there needs to be corrective action on both the expenditure and, for that matter, the revenue sides of the budget. We need to have, as Glenn Stevens said last week, a serious conversation involving the Australian electorate about how much we're prepared to pay for the government services we expect to have delivered to us. And if today's numbers start that conversation, while it can't come wholly from the government, that would be a very good thing.